person had a trailer that caught fire, and he called the Granby Fire Department to put out the fire in Connecticut, Granby, Connecticut. And they came, and they unrolled their hoses, and then they looked and saw exactly that the trailer was parked in Massachusetts. They rolled up their hoses and said, "You'll have to call Southwick," and they drove away.
This cloudy day might not be terribly inviting, but the location is very important. See, there's a part of the Massachusetts border that jets south for about 4 kilometers into Connecticut and goes 4 kilometers east before heading back up north. The eastern border of this notch follows the edges of this body of water. So what's its deal? Why does this little notch even exist? To unravel this mystery, I sat down with Lester Smith, curator of the King House Museum in Suffield, Connecticut.
But what happened is this. Massachusetts got settled before Connecticut. People came to Plymouth, as you know, in 1608 or something, and the Massachusetts Bay Colony out of Boston got going. So later on, in 1642, people began to think, we better find out where this boundary is. And folks in Massachusetts got some volunteers. They weren't very skilled at it, though. Anyway, they took a sight on the sun and measured the latitude of the spot that they found north of Providence in Massachusetts that was the southernmost point of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Their determination in 1642 was the basis for Springfield, Connecticut to become Springfield, Massachusetts. Pretty soon, other people began to feel that they better do a better job of finding out where that boundary was. And they found that Mr. Woodward and Mr. Saffrey, the guys who made the mistake in the first place, were 8 miles wrong, and figured out that several towns had been settled in Massachusetts that really ought to be in Connecticut. But Massachusetts didn't much like the idea. Things were going on in their relations with the Crown in those days and what was going on in Europe, that they didn't want to make a fuss about it. And they pretty much accepted the idea of those towns becoming Connecticut as a fait accompli.
In the 1790s, people in Massachusetts grew unhappy with how the towns had been divided. A new solution was needed. According to author Mark Stein in his book, How the States Got Their Shapes, finally, in 1804, the two sides agreed that, as compensation to Massachusetts for losing these towns, Connecticut would partition the Congamon Lakes farther west. This is why there is a notch in the northern border of Connecticut. However, some oddities still remain.
So right now, we have this situation where the folks who have cottages on the eastern shore, their cottages are in Connecticut, and they pay taxes to the state and to the town of Suffield. But if they have a dock and it sticks out into the water, they have to pay fees to Massachusetts, and they register their boats in Massachusetts, and they're furious about that.
Lester knew his stuff, but I also wanted to hear a perspective from the Massachusetts side of the notch. So I spoke with Lee Hamberg, president of the Southwick Historical Society.
From what I've heard over the decades, the term jog is almost exclusively used in Massachusetts because it physically describes the part of Massachusetts that jogs down into Connecticut. However, if you go into Connecticut, people typically use the term notch because they think of Southwick as taking a notch out of Connecticut.
Given the storied history of the Massachusetts-Connecticut border, I was curious to hear if Lee perceived any ill will between the towns on the notch.
I don't think there's, any real difference whether you go on one side of the boundary or the other as far as the people. They're all good people, and I don't think there's any animosity one way or another.
It was pretty fascinating to dig into this story. As we often take them for granted, it is sometimes easy to forget how truly malleable borders can be.
They are social, political boundaries. There's no doubt about it. There's no real geography that explains why the boundary is where it is. There isn't any reason for that. But, direct impact on people.